We're happy to be here to discuss the Ranger program. With me is Assistant Parks Director Kimberly Moore, and she is going to be leading the presentation. It's a very small presentation, but we'd be happy to have a discussion and answer any questions after the presentation.
Usually it's like up on
There, they need to pull it up real quick. I see we want to see the slides.
Okay, yeah, brief pause while we'll work on our technical difficulties here. I guess I can look at that one.
Are you able to advance these for me?
I think so. Does this actually control?
No.
No.
I don't have PowerPoint quite yet, so maybe Bill can go first, or you guys can just speak to it, up to you.
It's linked on the agenda center, if that's
Okay.
helpful.
Yeah, if you guys both have it, that's what's most
All right.
important.
All right, yeah, then instead of putting it up on screen, we'll go through this here. And as Jennifer Gregerson had said, on the agenda, on Everett City Council's agenda center for this meeting is a copy of the presentation. All right, go ahead, Kimberly.
All right, so my name is Kimberly Moore. I'm the Assistant Parks Director, and I'm joined by Bob Leonard, Parks and Facilities Director. As part of the 2025 budget, the Park Ranger program has been eliminated. This includes 5 FTEs, 1 Ranger Supervisor, and 4 FTE Rangers. The Everett Park Ranger team have been consummate professionals and have done an outstanding job serving the community. 4 of the Rangers, including the Ranger Supervisor, have taken the Voluntary Separation Incentive Program and have found other jobs. 1 of the Rangers has moved out to the watershed, working with the Utilities Division now. We wish them the best for their future as they wrap up their work in Everett next week. Tonight we're here to discuss park safety as well as parks plans for mitigating the loss of these team members, while also recognizing that there will be service reductions experienced by the public as a result. As you well know, the city was faced with a familiar challenge dealing with the 2025 budget deficit of approximately $12 million. Last summer, for the first time, we asked our community for sustainable revenue to protect public services. Voters decided against a levy lift. Our options for reductions were extremely limited due to the number of reductions that have already been made over the years. Administration, with assistance from department leadership, had to make difficult decisions. We offered a voluntary separation incentive program as part of the budget reduction strategy. As I mentioned, all but 1 Ranger who has been reassigned to utilities elected to participate in the VSIP program. Before we jump right into service reductions, we do want to acknowledge that there may be some misconceptions of what the Rangers do with regards to park safety. Park Rangers enforce EMC 9.06 Park Code. They get their authority from the Parks Director. Since they lost access to their ORI, Originating Agency Identifier, and the information that having an ORI provided, Rangers have spent much of their time driving from park to park, being eyes and ears throughout the park system, closing restrooms, locking 6 gates, and providing support to other departments. We have 45 parks in Everett, and only 5 park rangers covering 7 days a week of operations. Most of the time, there is not a ranger in a park, so the perception that parks are safer because we have park rangers may not be entirely accurate. I don't want to discount their work, as they have been an excellent resource for various issues that come up. But keeping parks safe is not the sole responsibility the Rangers provide. We've always relied on EPD for public safety in our parks. Moving forward, we have short-term and long-term plans for meeting some of the service needs that are being vacated by the Rangers. Short-term, we plan to temporarily close some park restrooms and install portable restrooms that will remain open at all hours in the 9 most used parks. Long-term, we are in the process of getting specifications and pricing to add technology solutions to these restrooms. We're in early discussion with partners about the potential use of volunteers in our parks, but we need to have further discussions with our union partners and HR before we commit to further work with volunteers. We're proposing to leave all park gates open. As you will see from the list on slide 5, of the Everett's 45 parks, only 9 have gates, 3 of which are already either left open or kept closed. We believe that while not ideal, this is a service reduction that should be tolerated as part of the budget reduction efforts. So please let us know what questions we can answer.
All right, any comments, questions? Councilmember Ryan?
Not at this time, no, that was hard, thank you.
I guess I'll make a couple of overall comments because I've been working with the Parks Department actually as part of a cooperative program even years and years ago in a kayak club on our intro to kayaking program and the demos on Silver Lake and the Silver Lake Triathlon before that. And I'm probably not the only person who recognizes that over the years, with cost considerations, Parks' budget has declined, the number of programs has declined. There's been a real effort to do some cooperative things using city resources like the facilities itself with other external parties to provide Parks programs. So I want to say I appreciate that. I think our community members appreciate that. But this is an explicit recognition that we're doing the will of our voters with respect to budgets and that sort of thing. And I don't think I had any more on that. Thank you also for the clarification, because I know the parks are a vital resource, especially for as our city gets denser and as housing gets fewer and fewer big backyards and that sort of thing, or yards at all, then the parks are really a critical part of that. So I want to thank you for the work to do all you can with these limited resources.
I just wanted to thank the rangers for their service as well. I know it's probably difficult for them to walk away from the city, so thank you to them.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, there used to be a resident ranger in Thornton Sullivan Park, for example, so in a building that was there that's no longer there now. So yeah, that's I guess we'll seek further direction from our community members in the future and do all we can to be as efficient as we can. All right then.
I'll just say, yeah, we thank you, and we'll pass on those comments to the Rangers. I appreciate that, and yeah, we're just committed to making sure that we'll keep doing what we can do to keep everything going and as safe as possible, with the realization that the Rangers' sole position wasn't necessarily keeping the parks safe.
Good point. And also we'll look forward to hearing more with respect to negotiations that would support some of our community-minded residents in helping act on some of these things. I know we've done cleanups with neighborhood groups and that sort of stuff before, so I know there's a reservoir of goodwill out there, and we'll try to do whatever we can with that.
I appreciate you saying that to council members on the go, because I do think that's one of the things that we can do is just continue to be committed to activating the parks and getting people in the parks. We think that that is probably one of the best things that we can do is get people in the parks, and those eyes and ears are really deterrent. The light really does drive away that dark.
Good. That makes perfect sense to me, and I know that with the speaking again of Silver Lake, where I live close, the trail around there has also really activated that area more. We see a lot of use of it. We see a lot of recreation, kind of in the same way we did in some of the early COVID times where people weren't at work, so they were out and about, and it was where they could be without a mask and walk their pets and that sort of thing. So I appreciate your work and the department's work to do all we can with that.
Great. Thank you
Great.
very much.
One last follow-up. So when we're, trying to meet our $12 million mark, the elimination of the park ranger program, how much is that total price tag to help us get to that mark? Just for context.
It's about $600,000 a year.
Okay,
Most of that was salaries.
thank you.
Okay, and
Yeah.
those will be ongoing savings then?
For sure. Yeah, and I wanted to, I guess, put a punctuation mark on the volunteers. When I talked with different neighborhood associations and we were brainstorming ways that the community can help, it did come up quite a few times about using and utilizing volunteers to help fill in the gaps, and that they're, like, in particular, folks were saying, you know, we're retired, we have extra time on our hands, we love this city, we'd be happy to pitch in. So I think pursuing that avenue, I've heard support for that from the community, so just wanted to share that.
That's great. We love to hear that. We have some good projects that'll be coming up too. Maybe we can even plug that right now is Loganberry Trails. That is really going to be a community-driven type of project. We're working with Washington Trails Association, but they're going to be basically holding work parties so people can come out and help build those trails. So that'll be definitely one way so that people can get involved. But we're always open to having people really volunteer in what we really consider their park system.
Well, and a note about the, I think the earlier partnerships with Forterra and a bunch of volunteer work that we were removing ivy and holly and invasive things from some of the parks. And I'm happy to report in the areas that I've seen in 2 or 3 parks, a lot of that stuff is still gone. I thought after a decade or 7 or 8 years it might have come back, but it appears that that's been good. And with respect to YMCA activity in the Thornton Sullivan Park, I see they use that area now that was opened up from that activity. Now, I don't think we're currently running anything of that sort of stuff with Forterra anymore.
Well, we're not really partnering with Forterra on the volunteer side of it. We're still associated with Forterra as just a partnership, but they're not running that volunteer piece for us. But we are doing stuff internal, and we've recently received grants for tree plantings and those types of things. So we are running a lot of those types of projects still.
Okay.
There are plenty of ways for people to get involved.
Okay, good. Well, that'll be, I think, an item for our agenda several months from now. We'll maybe do an update on that. All right, then on to our second agenda item for tonight. A briefing from our legal department on a draft noise ordinance or an update to the city's existing noise ordinance.
Good evening, Hill Kamen from Legal. Do you have a copy of that?
Is this the one that's part of the agenda?
Yep, looks
Yes,
like you have
okay.
a copy.
Yes, we do.
Okay.
And this also, for those viewing, will be part of, if you go to the Everett City Council's Agenda Center, then you'll see this on the agenda for this meeting.
Thank you. And this is really a culmination of about a year's worth of work amongst many different departments that included legal, but also police and HR and public works and outside counsel. So a lot of people had feedback into these changes. I actually came into the process pretty late, so got it over the finish line. So some of these things, you know, if you get deep into them, we may have to call in other staff to answer the questions. But I'm going to walk through an overview of the big changes that are in this. One of the biggest changes that has occurred is that it moves the enforcement of this out of HR and into code enforcement, where they'll be in a better position to be able to enforce that. It also distinguishes noise that is episodic versus ongoing, which was one of the things that was asked to change in order to address the different kind of noise situation, something that's ongoing versus episodic. It also brought parts of this ordinance in line with state law, so it's just some general updates that needed to be done in order to keep up with changes in state law. It tightened up certain definitions. Some of those were just outdated definitions. Some of them there were law changes, particularly around the definition of plainly audible. So there have been some case law changes on litigation, and so that was adjusted in order to bring that in line with that. And then we looked again at the various land use zones and looked at the level of noise and how to decide what that appropriate level is based upon those districts. So there's been some adjustments to that in the ordinance. Another change that runs throughout the entire ordinance is loosening up the definition for how to take sound measurements, what kind of devices and training that is required. That is really a result of the degree to which technology has made using these tools easier to operate, allowing more people, more staff to be able to operate them and take measurements and enforce under this ordinance. So a lot of those are in the definitional section. Moving to the, so that kind of covers through definitions, getting to 20.08040, the environmental sounds maximal levels. The biggest change there really is that we created a sanction scheme that starts as an infraction, but for repeated violators moves up and puts in criminal sanctions, so that for people who are not heeding the earlier lower level enforcement, we have a little bit more teeth to be able to enforce on those. The section on motor vehicle noise, in that section, the state has preempted the law related to traffic enforcement. And so we are limited in our ability to deviate from state law in the area of traffic enforcement. To make any changes in that, so that's enforced only through an infraction on vehicle equipment noise, would require action in Olympia to change that or fix that. I will note that we have added that to our legislative agenda because we believe it's something that is important to, we hear about those, I'm sure you hear about those complaints. It's something we'd like to see to be able to address. I would note that one of the, hopeful things that we don't have now, but we're starting to see in other jurisdictions, is the use of noise detection cameras in the same way that we're using red light cameras or speed zone cameras. The ability to detect that and issue infractions based upon that technology, to have that would also require a change in state law in order to be able to take advantage of that technology. But I think that is an area that we will want to look to in the future, just given the nature of trying to enforce on these, that there is not always going to be an officer present in the location where the noise is occurring. It's very hard to catch a moving target and be able to enforce against it. The public nuisance noises was, a lot of this was clarified to make it a little bit easier and clearer to enforce, and also add the graduated penalties under that section. And then under the variance section, we changed that in order to bring that in line with the ways that we do variances in other parts of our ordinance, and also to limit the ability to get a variance to government entities. So that's a real broad overview of the major changes that are included in this proposed amendment. I know it's something we wanted to talk about here and get feedback. And certainly can look at areas once you've had an opportunity to look at that, and take that feedback, make any other adjustments, either here or at the full council.
Councilmember Ryan?
I got a whole bunch.
Okay.
Great. So speaking of the noise detection cameras, section 2, declaration of policy, C1, types of noise, it limits it to a human using a sound level measurement device. So I think we should include something that would allow for a camera of some sort, so it's not a human with like a detection device in their hand, but like a certified electronic device could also be a appropriate receptacle.
That's forward thinking, so when we have that opportunity, we won't have to bring that back.
Let's see, and then I just wanted to confirm as well for that next section down, number 2, when we're talking about sporadic noise. This does, or I guess the noise ordinance in general as well, it applies to modified exhausts, right? And I feel like when, this is like a very legal, wordy definition of like the pop, 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 exhaust, is that correct?
So that would be, the muffler noise would be under the motor vehicle section 20.08070.
Okay,
And there is a section on a modified exhaust system. So it is unlawful for any person to modify the exhaust system of a motor vehicle in a manner which will amplify or increase the noise emitted by the engine of such vehicle. So that would be the section, and the enforcement of that is in that same section. And that's comes from the state law under Title 46.
great. Under definitions, it mentions, this is just a suggestion, it mentions the different noise control districts, and it's District 1, 2, and 3, but with districts in, that we have geographical districts in the city, it got confusing for me to talk about, like, if it could be changed to A, B, and C instead, or a different
Sure.
type of measurement that's not already being used by the city, or different definition, I think that'd be helpful just for clarity.
I think that's just legacy language in the ordinance that was not
No worries.
anything new.
Let's see, under impulse sound, it mentions, an ambient level by more than 10 decibels, and I was wondering if you have an example of like, about how loud that is, just for context. On page 4,
I s-
yeah, the definition for impulse sound.
I do not personally have an example of that, but that's, would be the kind of thing that we could provide that feedback. I know, Megan Monroe has done a lot of enforcement on this, so she would be in a good position to provide that.
Sure. Yeah, I think it'd just be
Yeah.
helpful to know what that threshold is, and also how often is that threshold exceeded? You know, is if it's, just to make sure it's right size, it's not too low, it's not too high, it's just right. Also under definition, I see that there was, the removal of the public nuisance noise section, which had previously been N, and I was just curious why that had been removed.
That was removed because it's put back in under section 090, the public nuisance noise.
Okay.
There's a whole section in there that addresses those.
Okay, great. That got answered. I also wanted to mention that I appreciate the attention to not allowing for the modification of exhaust. I think, there's the two sides of it, where there's a person who has a modified exhaust, but then there's also the act to modify it, and addressing that act, I think, is a good move, so I appreciate that. I did have a concern under that same section on page 10 now for motor vehicle noise, mufflers and exhaust systems. I've heard of instances where people have had their carburetor stolen, and then it makes for a very loud exhaust because that function's not there. So even though they were the victim, they would be in violation of not having a car in good working order, which, if they gotta get to work, they gotta get to work. And so I'd appreciate some sort of consideration for, like, when it's not intentional, or when it's, just a situation like that, I guess. So I'm not quite sure how that could be included or worded, or if there's, maybe something that could be added about the discretion of an officer, or something along those lines, just to take into consideration that not everybody has intentionally a car that's very loud and would be in violation of that section. And then I was also curious under the same section about, that mentions the violations, and a previous section had addressed habitual violators. So I was curious if there was a similar, enforcement or similar policy for habitual violators of, motor vehicle noise and modified exhaust. They get pulled over, they still don't modify it, and then they just keep re-offending. So, I'd like to see that included.
That is one, because this section is limited by what the state law is, and because unlike other areas where cities are allowed to make more restrictive laws, we can't, we're limited in Title 46. The case law says that cities can't, the traffic law has to apply broadly across the whole state. And so they don't allow cities to make more restrictive laws than the state law when it comes to traffic law. And since these all fall into the regulation of vehicles and streets, then that would be something that we should add as a suggestion to the changes that we'd like to see in state law. Because I do think that does happen. People just sort of see it as a tax they're willing to pay on having the muffler. And then there's no increase in penalty for doing that.
Yeah, and I think we've been seeing, that in Seattle.
Right.
Where their hands are tied, with repeat offenses, and there's not much enforcement behind it. Go ahead.
The bit of clarification then, that is a different section than the one which allowed, after multiple citations, there to be a misdemeanor charge.
Right, because that was in other, the sentence enhancement ordinance, right? So those were in the other section of the criminal law, and the entire traffic code is written so that it has to apply equally across the state, so that you driving in a highway, you know, in Everett, you have basically the same laws as you do driving
So
in
that-
Mukilteo.
That applied to non-vehicle
Correct.
noise.
So in other areas of law, cities can, in their discretion, make things, they can have a harsher penalty than there is under state law.
Great. And then moving on to the next section about environmental noise, I had a question from a community member at the neighborhood association meeting this week about, with concerns about, with so many mixed-use buildings coming online in the area, which is great. Sometimes the first floor cafes, they have the outdoor seating, and there's music and there's noise, which can be disruptive for the tenants that live in the building. So there was a request to have a policy in place that limits especially the music noise outside, to make sure that it's not protruding too far from the intended area. Also, in that same kind of section, I'm on page 12 under public disturbance noises. It mentions that specifically, oh, never mind, I read that wrong. So I answered my own question. Great, okay. And I think that's all I had, but I know this has been a long time coming. I'm very glad to see it. I hear about traffic noise all the time at neighborhood meetings, so I'm glad that I can report back that it's close to the finish line, so thank you.
Yeah, as you can see, there's a lot of different areas here, and the last point you mentioned about the mixed use, I think that's really a policy decision about which interests, you know, we want to be able to regulate. I mean, the ability of a venue in a downtown location to be able to have music and draw people in, you know, at the same time people are living now in the same location. So those are, you know, two interests that we want to support both of those, and it gets complicated when they don't always align. But you know, that would be a good question, I think, you know, for council to debate as terms of where to fall on that.
Well,
as
yeah,
opposed
and
to
with
where-
respect to the specific locations, I think the expectation in the suburban area versus a downtown area, if one is residing in a multifamily area in a core downtown, then you would have somewhat less expectation of privacy or of quiet. I've had the chance only to scan this so far, but, and I'm looking at the sort of interface between the way the statutes are written and the way the enforcement and actions go and how that interacts with some of the most impactful noise that our residents have been talking with us about, as Councilmember Ryan had said. And the ones in particular I'm thinking of with respect to vehicle noise are pretty much all fall into the modified exhaust, modified engine systems specifically for ultra loud exhausts, and the relatively recent proliferation of backfiring as a statement, as a performance. I'm not so much worried. I think you mentioned carburetor, but you probably meant catalytic converter, and certainly discretion. Yeah, I expect there to be discretion among our officers if someone has said, yeah, my catalytic converter was stolen yesterday and I've got a week to get an appointment to a dealer for an expensive repair on that. We certainly don't want to penalize, and I have every confidence that our police will exercise appropriate discretion there. But I guess back then to a question I'm not ready to answer yet to my community members at the meetings and things like that. If there is an exhaust, I've heard some of these, they're plainly audible, even loud at distances of a quarter to half a mile. They are extraordinarily, obviously, heavily modified. And I guess what I'm wondering about is if the question I expect to get is when we hear those, either extreme loudness or repeated backfiring and from distances where you clearly you shouldn't be hearing that, is that where there is officer discretion to say, yes, I see that's been, I can obviously see and attest that has been modified and that's not allowed? Is that the kind of thing that an officer can write an infraction for?
Well, I can say that I completely understand that frustration. I even considered leaving the law to join the police for the sole purpose of going out and writing tickets for people with a modified exhaust. Yes, officers have the discretion to decide that they're not going to write against somebody who, had their muffler just fall off. Things like that happen. In terms of, yes, officers can enforce that, when they hear that sound, they can write those tickets and, in their ability, but an officer has to observe it. It does require, enforcing this requires that noise to be observed by the officer and not just by a citizen calling in a complaint. So, they would be able to, testify that this is a modified exhaust and determine that based on their training and experience, in addition to whether or not they had some tools of, some measurement tools that are available to them.
Okay, because from being in some of these streets and arterials, sign waving, as part of the campaign, I remember there were areas, middle of the day kinds of times, including, and nighttime, but in the middle of the day, where vehicles were repeatedly doing this. It was easy to see. It was a fairly obvious thing, and it was astonishingly loud. So I guess that's the kind of thing then that I'm, as I say, I'm trying to understand where the statutes meet practicality here and what will work for our officers and for our community members. So thank you. I will spend more time with this beyond the excellent questions that Councilmember Ryan asked. I don't think I had more. Jennifer, was there anything from administration on this that you wanted to add? Okay.
Great. I think as a suggestion, I think I've heard through the grapevine that Flock is working on the audio cameras. I'm not even sure if it's called a camera anymore, but I would support some sort of like resident reporting type system where you know, if you're at a stoplight, the person in front of you is noisy, remember their license plate number, that there's like a portal to report that, and then utilizing the full spectrum of Flock services to be able to like find them, or like just the noise camera, the license plate readers, the whole nine would be able to work together and use AI to help us address the situation. So just as like a program recommendation, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, and I'm certainly not an expert on enforcing this. I'm looking over to Deputy Chief there, but they are challenging to enforce because it's a moving target. So, you know, you could call and say there's a car driving by, and they drive by here every day at 5 o'clock, and the ability to get an officer to come, you know, they're not necessarily going to be able to sit and wait for that. So there is that challenge that is not something that we can address by an ordinance. It's just a challenging thing to enforce on. So I think in the long run, having the ability to use those tools, because these are really disruptive to the quality of life for many people. You know, I live in Everett, and this is one of my, you know, pet peeves. Like, it really is something that is disturbing, and so exploring ways that we can do more than what we're limited to now, given the current state of the law.
Well, and with respect to disruption, you know, Everett is a city where people make things, and they make them at all hours. I think it's especially painful for some people who are working unusual shifts to just not be able to get the rest they need. I'm wondering if the Everett at Work application has the mechanism in it to say 3:30 p.m. every day at Everett Mall Way and 7th, there is a display of this kind of noise by somebody going by. Is there a way for that to, again, it's not a requirement, but if it's the kind of thing in a briefing that our police department knows about, then if that officer happens to be in that area tomorrow, the next day, a week from now, but he knows that 3:30 at Everett Mall Way and 7th. Jennifer, I think you have something to say.
I was just gonna, I think that's certainly a possibility, and I don't know for sure, but I think often our officers would encourage folks just to use the non-emergency line for any of those types of situations. Yeah, I
'cause
mean, it's better if it's happening at the time, but
Yeah, but
that's
I
a
mean,
way
I know
to reach folks.
the
with
department
that.
operates on data, and that helps them allocate limited resources, and if that, because I know that some of the most frustrating of them are the ones that happen repeatedly, and that very repetition may be a vulnerability and allow us to do something about it.
Well, one of the things I learned through this process is that there's a bit of an arms race in this. There's a thing called a bypass switch, where someone can install this modified muffler and then just turn on a bypass switch and have it go to a regularly sounding muffler to make it so that they can't be detected when an officer comes to enforce it. And given that it does seem culturally to be expanding, with more people wanting to, you know, add these kind of modifications to their vehicles, I suspect we're going to be, you know, confronting those kind of, you know, as our technology gets better, the people trying to evade being, you know, punished for it are also going to look for ways to get around it.
I think the prevalence is higher, though. I can say even from my childhood, those bypasses were back in the 60s. They've been here for quite a long time. They're probably electronically, but that also was why I asked about an officer's ability, having plainly witnessed something that was way outside I mean, because the sort of standard switching out a muffler for a less muffled muffler, that's been going on for a long time. That produces some fairly modest things. The kinds of things that I think disturb our community members the worst are very obviously taken to an extreme, and they've recently been enhanced by just repeated backfiring. And so, thankfully, that's why I asked the question about if an officer sees something that's plainly he can identify the car and the extraordinary noise, then that's I suppose, prima facie evidence that the
Yep.
exhaust had been modified, and even the addition of the bypass is probably not allowed from the
Yep.
EPA rules.
And I think I recall seeing a allowance for modified exhaust at certain types of events. Like I wouldn't want Cruise in Colby to be illegal or any car shows in the area, you know, like
Right.
there's a designated place and time where folks can show off their vehicles and the power of their engine things. So there is an allowance though for those types of events to still happen, right?
There is.
Okay.
And once again, clear jurisdiction by the people who we hire to have that judgment, one of whom we'll be swearing in tonight. All right, well, that's all I had. I think we're set then.
Great.
With no further agenda, no further items on our agenda, this meeting is adjourned.